The scheme, the 13th of February, 2025. It is not that there is a sickness in their hearts. It is that they have neglected the Word of God, and that caused them to get adapted to whatever mental issues that a person would suffer when they are away from God's revelations. The servant said to the man. The man was crying because he did not understand what was happening with him. The man said in astonishment, "What is this type of mental disease called? Should every disease have a name?" The servant replied, "Call it whatever you desire. It's a disease caused by having neglected the words of God, or have not been exposed to it. In its extreme cases, this is equivalent to what was called a demonic possession." People around the servant started exclaiming and murmuring. He looked around him, trying to calm them down, saying, "I said it is in the extreme cases. If someone spends all his time working, playing, or studying things that do not pertain to God in any way, they develop this kind of illness. It happens because they are not being cleansed by the words of God and not being exposed to the teachings of His holy books." The servant crossed through the group, saying, "Excuse me, please make way." And he stood in front of the hall. Then looked back at the group and said, "Do not spend too much time away from God's words. Read them, recite them. Go to a holy place where God's name is mentioned. Do not spend all your time engulfed in what this life has to offer." He turned his back and faced the gate. Then, walking into the hall, he called to the group, "This life will perish. Only what God has will remain." The man who was crying said, "Will do." Then he looked at his brother and asked him, "Do you still have the Quran with you?" His brother said, "Yes, it is in the car." Then they both made their way to their car and drove away. Upon entering the hall, the guard spoke to the servant, saying, "There are only 3 people for the second proceeding." The servant replied, "This means that today will be a very quick session." Then he laughed, pats the shoulder of the guard, then walks into the courtroom. "You are all early today," the servant said to the crowd waiting in the front row. "We have jobs that we need to get back to," one of the people said. The servant sat down in his desk and asked the man, saying, "Let's start with you. How can I help a busy man?" The man replied, "Work is stagnant, and we are not getting enough money to pay the government. How much money should every one of us pay to the government in the case that we make no money in our work?" The servant replied, "You are here very early, and you see people still walking in the courtroom, and you explain that it is because you have work to get back to. Then you say that you do not get any money from your work. If so, then why are you rushing to get back to work? If you get no money from your work, why are you still working?" The man replied, "I'm not getting any money from work. It all goes to the salaries for the workers and the operation costs, buying papers, ink, cleaning supplies, and the like." The servant responded, "If you are paying your workers, then that is good money that you are making." The man said, "But I'm getting nothing in return." The servant asked, "What kind of job are you doing?" The man said, "A print shop for school supplies." The servant said, "Then you are paying the government by helping the children learn. You should also pay 2.5% of the money that you get from your job to those who need money. This amount should not go to the government. It is not a tax. It is a sum that has to be paid to poor people, and you have to pay it by yourself." The servant then looked at the man and said, "Does that answer your question?" The man said, "But the government people would come knocking at my door asking for money." The servant said, "If they do, open up your drawer and let them take whatever is in it. Then file a report that you have been robbed." Upon saying that, the man started laughing and said, "Are you serious?" The servant said, "Remember what Jesus said, 'Give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's.' Caesar, in your case, is the government, and the money you are giving to God is the money that would be taken from your monthly wages. 2.5% of the money that you make should go to the poor people and those who need it. The same applies to every worker that you have. Each one of them will have to pay 2.5% of whatever you are paying them to the poor." Then the servant repeated his question, "Does this answer your question?" The man said, "It does." Then he backtracked his steps and left the courtroom from the back. The servant said, "It is no wonder that Jesus did not like money." The second man looked like he had come from the village close by. He said, "I have come to reclaim my right." The servant said, "What is your right that you want to reclaim?" The man said, "I have lived more than 10 years in my family's farmland. It is a big farm on the outskirts of the city. 2 months ago my father died, and the farmland, which I have been the one to tend, was supposed to be given to his children after him. I have 2 brothers who want to sell the land and use the money to invest inside the city, but I have lived my entire life in it, and my children are learning how to tend the land and harvest the fields." The servant interrupted, "Do you have money to pay your brothers and buy their share?" The man said, "They do not have a share. Before my father died, they had not been around. They would not come to visit, nor did they speak with him. I have been with him for 10 years, until he died 2 months ago, and they had never so much as sent him a letter, or care as so little as ask about him. My father essentially told me that the farm would be mine after he passes away." The servant replied, "Does he have a will?" The man said, "He only said that to me. He did not write anything down. He died suddenly." The servant said, "Are your brothers with you here?" The man said, "They did not want to come. They claimed they were too busy." The servant responded, "They do not have time to settle a dispute that was, according to your statement, clearly stated by greed. Have your brothers come together to the courtroom tomorrow." The man said, "I will try to convince them to come, but they would not listen to me." The servant said, "Tell them that if they do not wish to settle the dispute, then the verbal statement of your father counts as a will. This should make them reconsider. Did your father have any daughters?" The man said, "One daughter, but she is married." The servant said, "She has to be considered as well. Please inform her to attend with your brothers tomorrow." The man nodded his head, carried his hat off the table, and left the room. "We are ready to go live," a man called out from behind the curtains. The servant first said, "I thought we were already live." Then he looked at the courtroom. Almost 4 rows of people are present, so the courtroom was not halfway full. Then he looked at the man who was left and asked, "Do you want this to be public?" The man said, "You are asking me?" The servant said, "Yes, you are the last to go today, and we have not yet started streaming live, so you can choose." The man replied, "I would rather not have it public." Then he looked at the ground with a blush on his face. The servant called to the man behind the curtains, "There is no need. Do not stream this to the public. We only have one case left and then we will be off for this session." Then the servant looked back at the man and said, "Please state your issue." The man looked at the servant and said, "I'm a Jewish convert to Christianity. I converted to Christianity when I was in my 20s, which is 12 years ago. But as soon as I did that, my parents disowned me. I come from a Jewish family who is very religious. My father had always wanted that I become a religious scholar when I grew up, but I changed my faith to Christianity in my school years. Lately, however, I feel very disconnected from what I believed in school. I met a woman at work and she said that if we are to get married, I will have to become Muslim." The servant replied, "Are you willing to marry a Muslim woman and practice religion as she practices it?" The man replied, "Becoming Muslim was a thing that I thought about when I was in school, but I chose Christianity." The servant interrupted, "We are saying two different things. Are you willing to practice the way the Muslim woman you wish to marry practices?" The man responded, "If we get married, then yes." The servant replied, "So your becoming Muslim is tied to marriage. You are not considering becoming Muslim for the faith itself, but only as a means to get married to the woman you like, who is a Muslim." The man said, "Yes and no." The servant responded, "How so?" The man said, "Yes, I want to become Muslim to get married to the woman I like, but no, the faith itself has been attracting me since I was in school." The servant said, "Would you have become Muslim had the woman not been in your life, providing a motive for you to become Muslim?" The man said, "Yes, I was thinking of becoming Muslim in school. The woman had nothing to do with that." The servant said, "Yet you became Christian in school. When your parents disowned you, as you said, they did so because you believed in Jesus as the Messiah." The man said, "No, they disowned me because I did not believe in what they believe anymore." The servant said, "But Jesus believed in what Jews believed. Jesus was a Jew to Jewish people. He said, 'I did not come to abolish the law, the Torah, but to fulfill it.' Believing in Jesus is in itself a tenet of being Jewish." The man said, "Then why would my parents disown me if belief in Jesus is essential to being Jewish?" The servant said, "It is the lack of knowledge that caused people to take actions and stances against their own kin for something that they do not understand." Then the servant leaned forward, bending his back, and asked the man with a low voice so as to not allow the crowd to listen, "Are you a Jew or a Christian?" The man replied, "I want to become Muslim." The servant said, "For faith or for the woman?" Then he laughed. The man said, "For faith." The servant went back to his chair, sat down and started saying, "Jews, Christians, and Muslims all believe the same thing. They are a monotheistic religion that believes in a single God, a single deity who should be worshipped by everyone, should be revered by everyone, and should be obeyed by everyone. Abraham's father disowned him for choosing to worship God instead of the idols that they made at his time. He was disowned for choosing belief against blasphemy." The servant looked at the crowd and pointed his finger to the right side, Then moving his hand to the left side, he said, "All of you worship the same God. Whether you like it or not, you all are bound to the laws of nature that the one God had put in place. People who die in an earthquake had died because the one God ordered the earthquake to happen. Those who die of a flood, like the flood of Noah, had died because the one God had ordered that flood to happen." Then he looked at the man and said, "If your parents disown you for belief, then you should just live with it. It is a choice that you had made because of the knowledge that you were given. It is a choice that you weighed against all the circumstances that were present. At the time of making your decision, you had the same capacity for reason as your parents. They reasoned to remain Jewish because of their social standards and being exposed to a specific type of belief. And you reasoned to change your religion based on your studies, your life, and your circumstances, whatever they may be." The man replied, "I was still unsure about my belief system, but I do believe in a single God. Yes." The servant said, "And what do you believe about Jesus?" The man said, "A servant of God, a prophet, just like all the other prophets before him, just like John, just like Isaiah, just like Moses." The servant replied, "Then whether you become Muslim or not, you already are a Muslim." The crowd started clamoring. Then they were all silent at a single instant. It is like they were all made to be quiet together. They were all unable to speak and unable to say anything. The servant said, "It is a blessing that we are not streaming this to the public today. I'm somewhat afraid that this might bring chaos and destruction caused by you, Christians, to everyone else. You do seem to be a hateful bunch when it comes to defending your false beliefs." The man said, "Why is it that no one can say anything anymore? It sounds very silent around us." The servant said, "You're probably the only person present in the room who rightly thinks that Jesus is human. The remaining crowd, by this being a preceding session for Christians, think otherwise." The man starts speaking that he is the servant interrupts immediately. "Do not say it, lest you become mute like them." The man stopped in his tracks and swallowed. The servant then said, "What you said is true. Jesus was only a messenger of God, who was able to perform miracles that no other human at the time was able to do. The sea split for Moses. Elijah raised the widow's son, and Joshua, son of Nun, commanded the sun to stop when he was fighting for the Israelites. Every messenger had a specific miracle that is accustomed to their time, and that caused people to believe they were sent by God to humanity." The servant looked at the mute crowd, and with a loud voice he said, "Jesus was the same, only a messenger, a human creation of God. God created Jesus just as he created Adam. God told Jesus, 'Be,' and Jesus was." One of the crowd regained his ability to speak, but starts crying with a muffled voice. He put his hand over his mouth and started murmuring to himself in fear. The man looked at him and said, "It seems as though people who get back their voice are very frightened. Why is that?" The servant said to the man, "You came for an issue with your life, and here you were given a lesson instead of a solution. Do you believe, as a man of faith, that Jesus will come back to earth?" The man said, "Yes, in Christianity we believe in his second coming." The servant said, "Not only in Christianity, in Islam and in Judaism, all believe the same thing. But in Islam, it is believed that when Jesus does come back, anyone who calls him anything other than a human messenger will die on the spot. Anyone who is a blasphemer, who would be within Jesus' line of sight, dies instantly. That is an interpretation of Revelations, where he is described with eyes like a blazing fire, and a breath which kills disbelievers. The servant then moved next to the man as he is looking towards the crowd. Then he looked towards him on his left and said, had Jesus come back and confronted this blasphemous crowd, each one of them would have dropped dead. They would not be given a chance to call him the Son, let alone Lord. As soon as the servant said these words, the issue became clear to the listening. It is as though they had even forgotten why they were mute. They did not understand that the reason why they became mute was believing something that is false about Jesus. Each one of them who was mute thought that the servant had put a spell on them, causing them to lose the ability to speak. The person who was crying with a muffled voice called out to the crowd, I was presented hell. I saw all of you in it, in a room just as big as this one, with all your heads next to you. He wiped his tears and looked at the servant and said, I saw all of them decapitated for thinking that God has a son. Then he looked at the crowd and asked them, crying and shivering out of fear, did you not see that? The servant then told the man next to him, this frightened man saw hell and saw all of this blasphemous crowd in hell, then came back afraid and shivering because of the sight. Will they believe him? The man said, they should. They are still mute. They are mute still, are they not? Why would they not believe him when they come back to their senses, frightened as he is? The servant said, they are not mute anymore. They can speak and they can reason. But God shows his signs to whomever he chooses. Maybe they had not seen anything. Blind, deaf, and dumb. The man said, do Muslims believe in heaven and hell? The servant started reciting from the Quran. And they said, become Jews or Christians and you will be guided. Say, no, become of the followers of Abraham, who was an upright person, who was not an idolater. Say, we believe in God and what was revealed to Abraham, Ismail, and Isaac, Jacob, and the sons of Jacob. And we believe in what was revealed to Moses, Jesus, and all that was revealed to the prophets from God. We do not make any distinction between any of them, and we consecrate ourselves to God. The man replied, this does not answer my question. The servant said, if any prophet of God spoke about heaven or hell, then believers must believe it. Those who do not believe in heaven and hell do not believe in God or his final judgment. What is life at the end of the matter, then, had there not been heaven and hell? So yes, Muslims believe in heaven and hell. The man said, I want to exploit this moment and ask, will all Muslims go to heaven? The servant laughed and asked, why do you not ask the frightened man? Then he looked at the man who was crying and said, did you see any Muslims in hell? The crying man said, I was too afraid. I saw everyone here with their heads beside them, decapitated for claiming that God has a son. Then he went around the room, pointing a finger towards the people he saw. I saw you, with your head beside you, decapitated for claiming that God has a son. Then he moved to the next person, a woman, who was looking towards the stage, and he said to her, I saw you, with your head beside you, decapitated for claiming that God has a son. Then he continued on through the first row of people. He saw an old man with a walking stick, and he said to him, I saw you, with your head beside you, decapitated for claiming that God has a son. Every time the man pointed to a person in the crowd, that person gasps for air as though they are coming back from a coma. Then they start crying their eyes out with no voice, as though they have lost their voice entirely, or as though they cannot remember how to speak. The servant pointed to the guards to calm down the man. The guard moved and grabbed the man from among the crowd, gave him some water to drink, but the man refused and said, I am fasting. Then a child from the crowd came towards him, and he cried to her, I saw you. You were there holding your parents' hands. You were with the new generation who shunned the false beliefs. You were alive among the dead. Even children would go to hell? The man asked the servant. The servant said, My knowledge is limited. The guard led the man outside the courtroom. The servant said, You want to get married to a Muslim woman who believes what you already explained, that Jesus is a human messenger. Then you need to become Muslim in order to get married to her. You say you are Christian, but your faith is Muslim faith, so it is easier for you to become Muslim than it is for those in the crowd. Then the servant called out and said, We have finished our proceedings for today. Please let the people leave the courtroom. Then, leaving the courtroom towards the hall, he asked the man to follow him. The man said, Why is it forbidden for a Muslim woman to marry a Christian man? The servant responded, Because God said it is forbidden. The man is the breadwinner. He has to know the limits of God's commandments, and he has to abide by the laws of God, who permitted some things and forbidden some things for both males and females. Therefore, a Christian who does not believe the Quran is the word of God would not permit what God had permitted, or forbid what God had forbidden. Therefore, the woman who is a Muslim would be torn between applying God's law in her house and following her husband. Whereas if the man is a Muslim, the way he runs his household would be in line with what God had ordained. Therefore, it would alleviate the burden set upon the Muslim woman. The man nodded his head. This makes sense. Thank you. And then he left the hall. 3 men from the crowd, who was made mute, turned to the other gate and waited for the servant in front of the hall. As soon as the servant left, they said to him, You have put a spell on us. The servant replied, How? Shouldn't you be believers as you claim? Spells cannot be put on believers. A man said, We were unable to speak when you were the only one speaking. The servant said, What was it in there? It was a discussion between 2 believers about one of them asking a question that only pertains to him. Why would you want a chance to speak about it? The man replied, It was not about that. The discussion was about Jesus. We wanted to speak about Jesus and we couldn't. The servant said, And what were you going to say about Jesus back then? The man wanted to speak, but the 2 men told him not to. They were both afraid, shaking, and hesitant to say anything. Then the servant told him, Why are you not saying it? Has fear from what happened to you delivered the message? Has fear become a messenger that you would heed already? The man started speaking out of anger and said, I'm not afraid. Jesus was, and then he could not continue the sentence. He became agitated because for the second time he had been made unable to speak. His friends nudged him left and right. Then they looked at the servant and said, "He cannot speak anymore." The servant said, "He can speak, but he can only say that Jesus is human. Otherwise, he will not be given back the ability to speak." Hasn't that been the issue that we discussed in court today? Haven't we spent a lot of time demonstrating and explaining what would happen to those who deny this fact? The servant looked at the man, and with a raised eyebrow he said, "It was not me who said you lot would be decapitated in hell for claiming such fallacies. It was one from among your midst, a person who was dumbfounded and came to his senses, shaking from the sight of those in hell." The man said, "Human," and then was able to speak again. The servant told the two men, "Make sure to hold on to the true faith. If this court proceeding was going to be anything, it should have been a lesson for you so as to not argue with God. If God says explicitly and clearly and without using any parables that he has no children, then stop ascribing him children." The man said, "Jesus is," and then he is struck with a seizure. "And this," said the servant, "is also a false statement. Take the hint. God is not human. Jesus is human." The man fell to the ground, and his friends stood next to him, crying, "Do something," they shouted to the servant. "I'm not a medic," the servant said. "Some people would consider this a natural occurrence, but all three of you know the reason why it happened. People will not believe you if you try to blame it on someone other than your own selves. You claim things about God which hold no value nor truth to you. Take your friend to the hospital. Maybe God will forgive his sin on account of his egotistic argument." The man stopped shaking, and his two friends stand him up and put his arms around their shoulders. He looked towards the servant with a dreading look. "I'm not the cause of your problem. Your own tongue brought about your inability to speak and your seizure. Your own tongue, who will testify to what you say in front of other people and in front of God, your Lord." The servant waved them goodbye and said, "Christians, reconsider your beliefs." The guard at the entrance of the hall said to the servant, "May I ask a question?" The servant replied, "Of course." The guard said, "Why are the sessions divided in such a way that every group of people is at a certain time?" The servant replied, "Because each of them follows a specific holy book." The guard said, "I mean, would it be difficult to have Jews, Christians, and Muslims come at the same time? This way, there would be more time to answer more questions from each of them." The servant said, "That is a good idea that we are working towards, but the time is not yet suitable for such a shift. Each group currently knows its time frame. Each judge knows which time they must tune in to the public proceedings which cover their court's religious alignments." The guard replied, "I understand. I apologize for the question." The servant responded, "No need to apologize. It is a valid question. As I said, this is what we are working towards, to have everyone come at the same time, present their issues while everyone else is listening. At least then, every person with a specific religious affiliation would understand that they all follow the same faith." The guard said, "The same faith?" The servant replied, "Yes, Islam or monotheism." The guard replied, "I'm afraid I don't understand." The servant said, "Maybe you should attend one of the sessions and ask this question in front of them. Then I will explain." The guard replied, which session should I attend? The servant said, another valid question. Your original question does not fall within one specific group and not the others. In fact, it should be asked in all of them. The guard said, should I attend all of them? The servant said, that would be the most suitable action. Attend each one of the sessions and ask the same question. I will tell the record keepers to have you ask your question before all the other people, so as to finish quickly and get back to work. Are you sure this is not much of a hassle for you? The guard said, I would only be doing my job. Additionally, I actually want to know the answer. The servant said, then so be it. We have the Jewish proceedings remaining today. Do you want to attend it today and keep the others for tomorrow? Or do you want to do all of them at the same time? The guard said, whatever you prefer. The servant said, you are very accommodating. Let us do it tomorrow, starting from the Muslim proceedings. The guard agreed and moved back to his desk, writing the note down, and said to the servant, all done. The servant replied, good. I'll be waiting for you tomorrow.